Have you ever wondered how one of the largest human migrations in history, the Atlantic slave trade, began? It all started around the 15th century, when European powers began to look across the Atlantic for new opportunities. This was a time when the idea of superiority based on skin color started to take root, setting the stage for centuries of exploitation. The Atlantic slave trade was a key component of a larger system known as the triangular trade. Europe sent goods like guns, cloth, and alcohol to Africa. In return, they didn't receive gold or spices, but human beings, Africans, who were forced into slavery. These enslaved Africans were then shipped across the Atlantic to the Americas. In the Americas, they were forced to work on plantations, producing goods like sugar, tobacco, and cotton, which were then shipped back to Europe. It's estimated that over 10 million Africans were forcibly transported to the Americas during this period. So the ground for one of the most devastating human exploitations was set. Now, imagine the magnitude of the impact such a massive exodus had on the African continent. The Atlantic slave trade didn't just take people away, it dismantled the very fabric of African societies. It disrupted social, political, and economic structures, leaving a vacuum that couldn't be easily filled. The loss of millions of lives was catastrophic. Diseases, malnutrition, and violence were rampant, both on the African coast and on the slave ships. Imagine entire communities being emptied out, families torn apart, and the human resources necessary for development and progress stripped away. The ripple effects of such a disruption were felt across the continent. Trade routes were altered, kingdoms fell, and societal roles were forever changed. The social, cultural, and human capital that was lost is incalculable. This was not a mere population shift, it was a seismic event that reshaped the continent in profound ways. Africa was left scarred, its societies irrevocably disrupted. But what happened when these enslaved Africans reached the Americas? As we delve into this question, we find that the enslaved Africans significantly influenced the cultural, demographic, and economic development of the Americas. They brought with them a rich tapestry of skills, languages, religions, and traditions. These influences are still apparent today, from the beats of Afro-Cuban music to the vibrant Creole languages and the deeply spiritual African-rooted religions. Their craftsmanship in areas like farming, metalworking, and carpentry played a vital role in building the infrastructure of the colonies, contributing to their economic growth. But the enslaved Africans didn't just passively accept their circumstances. They resisted their enslavement in various ways. There were revolts and daring escapes. They found solace and resistance in cultural expressions, like songs and dances, which served as coded communication for rebellion. The enslaved Africans, despite their circumstances, managed to leave a profound mark on the Americas. In the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the Atlantic slave trade was finally abolished. But could the scars really heal? This period marked the end of a dark chapter in human history. The abolition did not occur overnight. It was the result of decades of tireless efforts by abolitionists, both black and white, who fought against the inhumanity of the slave trade. Laws were passed, like the British Parliament's Slave Trade Act of 1807, which prohibited the transatlantic slave trade. Similar acts followed in other European countries and the United States. But the end of the Atlantic slave trade did not signal an immediate transformation. The transition was slow and fraught with resistance, as societies built on the economics of slavery struggled to adapt to a world without it. Even after the legal abolition, the scars of centuries of forced servitude remained. Societies on both sides of the Atlantic bore the burden of this brutal past. In Africa, societies were left decimated, with generations of young and able-bodied men and women ripped away. The social and economic structures that had been disrupted by the slave trade took time to rebuild, and some effects are still felt today. Meanwhile, in the Americas, the legacy of slavery shaped the cultural, demographic, and economic landscape. The enslaved Africans left an indelible mark on the societies they were forced to inhabit. Their skills, languages, religions, and traditions became woven into the fabric of these societies. Yet, the legacy of slavery also meant enduring racial disparities and social inequalities that societies continue to grapple with to this day. The Atlantic slave trade, one of the most brutal forms of human exploitation in history, did not just shape the histories of millions, but it also forged their identities. It created a diaspora of African descendants across the globe who have continued to influence global culture, politics, and economics. The Atlantic slave trade was abolished, but its legacy continues to shape our world. The echoes of this inhumane trade still reverberate today, reminding us of a past we should never forget and a future we should strive to improve. We've traveled through time today, exploring the Atlantic slave trade. We've seen its inception, witnessed its effect on Africa, and its profound influence on the Americas. It's a lasting legacy that underscores the importance of understanding our past. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Remember, understanding our past is crucial for shaping our future. Until next time.